All right. Well, Coach Pedulla, it's awesome getting to connect with you. And, I'm very, thankful, honestly, that you just reached out to me and was kind of sharing some of your information with me. And I definitely had the chance to check a lot of it out and love a lot of your content and definitely want to dig into that today. So I
Appreciate that.
appreciate you being on here with us.
Of
Um,
course.
just to
Thanks for
start,
having me.
yeah, absolutely. Just to start, obviously, for anybody that doesn't know who you are or anything about you, kind of give us a little bit of an update of like what your title is, and then kind of what you can work backwards, or you can work forward, and kind of what got you to where you're at now, what roles you've had, and kind of just what your responsibilities have been at those different stops.
Yeah, sure. I'll give a little brief synopsis of my path. I started off wanting to go the physical therapy route. I'm 25 years old, so that was back when I was like 18, 19 years old. Had a pretty like bad experience, not like bad working experience, but it wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. I was working as an aide at a clinic in my hometown in New Jersey, and it really pushed me to go the strength and conditioning route. I thought that there were better ways to prepare athletes. I wanted to be on the front end of preparation, so that's what's gotten me into S&C. I started off at TCU as an intern. That connection with Zach Dakin was formed through my head coach at the time. They had met at a conference called Pitchapalooza in Tennessee. So that was a good connection that I was able to capitalize on. My head coach referred me, and that was my first S&C position. From there, got an internship in my hometown that winter of 2020. And then that same place hired me full time, and I took that position in February of 21. And then when I graduated, I started working full time there. The guy that hired me actually quit my first week on, so this is like my first job at a school full time, and I'm thrown in the fire. And it's a private facility, right? So I got to market, I got to clean, I've got a program for everybody. I've got to do, upkeep. I've got to do outreach. Like I was the one man show there, and that went on for about 8 months until I saw the Royals opportunity. I interviewed with about, I think, 10 or 11 different organizations, professional baseball organizations, and the Royals were one of the first teams that offered me before that lockout happened. I don't know if you guys remember that lockout that took place in 2021 to 2022. So I capitalized on that opportunity, and then that was actually a part-time gig. They were like, "You're not experienced enough to work at a full-time affiliate." So I was like, "Okay, I got to get my foot in the door regardless here." So I took that job, and then 3 weeks in, they said, "Look, you made a good impression. We'd like to send you to Columbia, South Carolina, and give you the full-time role that you originally applied for." So that was huge right there. I did 2 years in Kansas City, and then I got a phone call from one of my mentors about this OU opportunity. He said, "Are you trying to get out of pro ball?" And I said, "Not actively, but what do you got?" And he told me about this opportunity, and it was a perfect fit. I have family here. So my title is just strength and conditioning coach. I'm not a director of performance for our program. I'm employed by Olympic Strength and Conditioning. But yeah, this is my second season here. I work with softball and women's golf at the University of Oklahoma. And yeah, on the side, I have my own business called Pedulla Performance, where I pretty much just deliver coaching education, consultations. I do opportunities like this, talking to staffs like yours, and yeah, it's pretty much what I do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, the fact that you said that you're 25 is crazy too, because I feel like I was 25, I was still wrapping up grad school and still haven't not really sure exactly what the heck my next step was going to be. So it's pretty impressive. I
Thank
think
you.
part of that obviously is because of that first internship, getting to be able to go to TCU and work with Coach Ken is as your first kind of like internship's pretty high level opportunity. That's awesome.
Yeah,
And
I will say for sure, I've been very fortunate. I've been very lucky along the way for sure. I think a lot of people attribute like career progression to like competency all the time or whatever other quality you wanna talk about. But I do think a lot of it is just being around the right people, building relationships. I think that's a huge aspect. I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard like it comes down to who you know a lot of the time. So I have been really fortunate to be around some great people that have formed connections of their own that I've been able to take advantage of. So I do give those people a ton of credit.
Yeah, I mean, and usually I kind of wait till the end to hit these last couple questions in terms of coaching career, but I do think it's worth, since we're kind of on that topic, I do think it's worth kind of just continuing with that. So when you think about like maybe when you were interviewing with the Royals, when you interviewed, I'm sure the internship with TCU, and then obviously interviewing with the position at Oklahoma, like what were some things that you feel like maybe stood out? Obviously, the network and who you know is like you said, extremely important. But what are some things that maybe stood out that you feel like other young coaches need to have as their qualities, or at least leverage those qualities, and be good about kind of, talking those qualities up so they have more opportunities to get coaching jobs?
I think a lot of people when they interview, they obviously you want to give people the answers that they want to hear, but if you're unauthentic, you can't fake authenticity. So I was very upfront in all my interviews about the things I didn't know. A big interview question for our staff. We're currently interviewing GAs, and like one of the things we're asking is, what are you self-aware enough to know what you don't know? Because that's a big thing. I think people will kind of like BS their way through answers to give people what they want to hear. But really, what they want to hear, a lot of these places, like they want to develop coaches who are, they're competent enough to know that they don't know the things they don't know, but they're also humble enough to know that I've got a long ways to go and I'm going to be compliant. I'm going to be coachable. And like that's what a lot of these organizations want. They want to pour into someone else and help people grow so that they can move on to a bigger opportunity. So I don't think people expect you to be perfect right off the bat. I think they expect you to be ambitious, professional. I think those things take the cake with like setting you apart from the get-go for them to know, I want to interview this person a little further. And then, they ask me questions that have to do with the actual job. Like in my first job, I never had access to force plates. So like a question I got is, okay, how have you measured fatigue? Like how have you found ways to measure fatigue? Because like that was a really big thing with the Royal system is like we're going to use data to actually inform our decisions a lot, and that wasn't really something I was accustomed to with where I came from. But I learned a way to find, what's the standard deviation from their all-time best jump height using z-scores and using just normal biostatistics. Like you don't need a ton of crazy technology to find similar answers as everybody else. So like I think these places, they want to see the effort you put in, given your resources, given your situation of like how you answer the same questions, instead of just conceding and being like, well, I don't have those same resources, so I don't really care to find an answer to it. Like I think they want to see that effort. That's a big thing.
Yeah, I think that's something that definitely, myself included, young strength coaches kind of have that Dunning-Kruger effect of where like you realize you don't know, you think you know more than you do, and those that can learn that they don't know as much as what they think they do, that the quicker their actual development is going to be, especially if they're willing to put themselves out there and willing to make, being okay making mistakes, being okay being uncomfortable, being okay like, hey, I don't have all the answers at 21, 22, 23 years old. I don't have all the answers I'm 35. And 10 years into coaching, I don't have half of the answers I thought I would have by now. So I definitely completely agree with you. Kind of just on that thing to kind of wrap this kind of part of the conversation up. Like, what's what are some things that you've done? Obviously, like with the force plates and things like that. Like, what are some things that you've done? Whether it's reading, watching, you're reaching out to people that have really kind of you feel like has expedited your growth in such a short period of time and kind of set you up to be more successful than maybe where you were 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Yeah, this is a question I get a lot. I think about the main demographic of people that I work with are young coaches that need direction, and experienced coaches that want to get into like the deeper, more sophisticated stuff. But I think there's so much information out there, people don't know where to start. And the most important thing is that you start somewhere, anywhere. So, I'm always taking in some kind of content and information every week. I mean, like a day like today, we got a game tonight. I'm probably not going to do any continuing ed. Like it's not like I'm doing something every day, but whether it's YouTube videos, I've been a member of Strength Coach Network since 2020. I mean, you're talking $250 a year for thousands of webinars that are from CVASPs, all these different seminars, like monthly webinars. You have coaching forums on there to ask any questions you want. I mean, I've probably spoken on hundreds of forums on that website, just asking questions of my own, starting forums and getting dozens of coaches to give me feedback and different insights. Like that's a very valuable tool. Talking to different coaches about what they think about the same issue and just getting the different perspectives. That's a huge thing. So, I mean, whether it's reading, YouTube, I mean, the resources are endless. I think the most important thing is that you're taking something in, and then you're going to find something that's like most relevant or pertinent to what you're dealing with right now, and then you're going to dive into that rabbit hole. And I mean, I've gone into dozens of different rabbit holes throughout the years. First, it was VBT, then it was force plates, then it was time passed by, and then it was resisted sprinting, load velocity profiling with resisted sprinting, VDEC. Now I'm back on force plates. I'm discovering things that I thought I had figured out that are maybe not so true. Um, things like that. You kind of just find what you need to like learn more about. You read something and you're like, I should probably dive into that more because that's pretty relevant for where I'm at right now. I think people get too far ahead of themselves and they're like, I need to know this thing out of like this fear of missing out. But I've always told my interns, like, be where your feet are. If it's pertinent to you right now, you should probably dive into that thing right now. You want to do a good job where you're at in the present. So I think finding resources that speak to your needs in the moment is important. And that's why lately I've been emailing coaches and reaching out to like, what's your biggest challenge right now? Let me help you through that and kind of shift the perspective. Like, you don't need to know about all these extraordinary and sophisticated things if they don't mean anything to your situation here. So, getting people to kind of reshape how they approach education, it should result in something positive and tangible.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true, and that's something that I definitely throughout my career have had the same kind of thing where it's like you're kind of focused on one aspect of training because that's the place that you're working at is utilizing the most of, and then you go to a different place and they're using something completely different, and you got to kind of like relearn their system and their philosophy and what they're using, whether it's force plates. And then the example, and we've had a couple of these conversations with other coaches about the aspect, like we just randomly, not randomly, I knew about it to an extent, but our basketball team and our football team at the Division II level, our coaches just decided they were going to buy GPS units like halfway through the football season, halfway through fall basketball camp. And like, they were like, hey, they're going to be here this weekend. I'm like, oh, you didn't really give me much heads up. So we've basically been learning it like trial by fire. And I don't know if I've learned as much as what I have more questions about. Like, it's one of those where like every time I feel like we have an answer, it's like, yeah, I don't know if I completely know that if that's the answer, if that's just a better question than what we had a month ago. So it's definitely something that, always that room for growth and that kind of stuff. So, and that stuff's not going away. The sports science stuff's not going away. So,
No, it's not.
what would you say? And I know this is kind of a hard question, very open-ended, and again, I'm sure it changes month by month, year by year. But what would you say are kind of like your overarching standards in terms of like the way that you expect your athletes to approach the weight room, and then maybe some of the overarching like principles or philosophies that you implement into their training programs?
Yeah, I think as far as standards, I think the standard starts at the very top. I mean, I hear a lot about compliance issues in programs, and one thing I help coaches out with, it's like, okay, if you have maybe two or three bad eggs on a team, it's probably not you. If you've got maybe half the team that's not bought in, it might be you. So I think like just standards of professionalism are big on my end, but with the athletes, I think effort, you can never coach effort hard enough. We're always coaching effort. Um, I think that one thing that athletes don't understand is like, oh, I'm just going to produce as much force as I need to move this bar. But it's like, no, I want you to dominate every single rep and move it as fast as possible. Like that, you're missing out on a training effect if you're not doing that. I firmly believe that. As far as like the principles that I'm implementing, I think my programs are very, very speed oriented. Like I look at the speed focus of the program because I think that's the most observable and most impactful quality that we're going to build. And then we're working backwards from that. So like in previous season, if we're working on acceleration, the weight room's going to reflect that. Deep range of motion strength training, loaded jumps, long coupling times on our plyometrics, deep knee and hip angles, things like that, that are going to be conducive to increasing acceleration. Then we're going to transition to more maybe max velocity when we hit the season. And the training's going to reflect that too. Lower relative intensities, maybe higher knee and hip angles. Because speed is such a observable quality, and I think the most impactful thing on the field, I'm designing that program first, and then the weight room stuff is secondary to that. It's supposed to support that. Um, Now, like in season, of course, we're not doing a ton of speed development, so it changes a little bit in season. Like I don't think I would adopt that same philosophy in season. It's kind of fluid based on the competition phase of the year. Um, yeah, I think that's a big thing in the off season is what's the speed focus, and then how are we going to complement that instead of making the weight room the main thing. Um, yeah, what was the second part of that question? I feel like I'm missing an aspect of what you asked there.
No, I mean, you answered the standards, and then it was basically your principles and philosophies that you follow, and I mean, I think for the most part, you've answered at least I think sounds like kind of similar to what we do is like making, especially for our field and even our court sport athletes, making speed the priority, and everything else kind of falls in line behind that. So
Right. I think there's a couple more philosophies that I want to get into here. I think like there's a big dichotomy between building robustness and avoiding injury. And I'm just going to be very forward with this. Like, there's a likelihood that your athletes are going to get injured, regardless of which school of thought you want to live by or assimilate to. And I think we could all agree on which side of that equation we want to be on. If we want to build robustness to the game, if you don't take that approach, like I think your incidence for injury is a lot higher. So that's a big thing. I'm a big high-low model guy, and I think the biggest principle that I live by is like what's the sport focus and what's the practice schedule like, and then we're going to orchestrate our week based off that. And I think we all can program ahead of time. We all have our annual plans. We all have the direction that we would like to go, but seldom does that happen. I don't know if you guys have read the strength training manual by Mladen Jovanovic, but his whole approach is like agile periodization. I mean, my program changes every single week. And you can't do that if you are looking at exercises and progressions and X's and O's as the root of your program. If the root of your program is principles and just what is the intended stimulus, you're going to have an easier time changing things up because your perspective's reshaped, and you're going to be like, okay, I can accomplish this stimulus with different things. So whether it's maximal strength, does it have to be a back squat ass to grass? No. It could be a pin squat moved with maximal intent, maximal effort, and just sufficient enough to stimulate that max strength, and that's it. So I don't think that we have to be thinking about it the way that many coaches are.
no, and actually, I watched the first video I watched was the one that you emailed me the link to, which is the basically your periodization and your progressions for your speed training. And I think it was in that one where you mentioned that as well in terms of like the weight room side of things of, we're not necessarily training exercises. We're training stimulus, or we're training an outcome that's what everything's rooted in. So it doesn't matter if you're doing a front squat or a back squat, like you're still, the stimulus is what you're chasing, not necessarily the exercise. Like the exercise doesn't matter as long as you get the desired outcome or the desired stimulus, and the desired adaptation, I guess, really at the end of the day. So I completely agree. I think that's awesome. One of the things that I wanted to ask in terms of, because you mentioned this a little bit in terms of the fall versus like in season now, and obviously this is something that we've started to fluctuate a little bit with some of our teams. We used to not really do any speed training in season with them because my assumption was like they're getting a lot of that from their sport, but I realized that might not be the smartest. And something we saw this year with our football and soccer teams is we actually had athletes getting faster at the end of the season because of the speed training that we continue to do. So how do you implement your speed training in season with your athletes? What does that volume look like compared to the off season? What does it look like? Do you do it during practice time? Are you doing it during lifting time? Is it a separate training session, separate days? Like, what does that typically look like for the speed
Yes.
development?
Give me 1 second and I'll answer that question. I'm just got a text from my head coach. Just give me a second.
All good.
All right. Sorry about that.
No worries. No worries.
Okay. So yeah, with the speed stuff.
Speed training
Yeah.
in season versus preseason and out of season.
Yeah, so I think in season, I did a post on this the other day. I think the biggest difference is going to be adopting what's like a frequency model versus a saturation model. So like saturation would be, we've got like 2 intense training days where we're allocating that to either acceleration or max V, and those volumes are going to be a lot more dense, a lot more intense. And that's going to run the athletes down a little more. We don't want that in season, so we adopt what's called the frequency model. So like if you took the volumes from those saturated days and you broke them up, and then spread them across maybe 3 or 4 days, and then you embedded that into practice. So I kind of microdose before practice more often than not. Um, and we might do a little bit in the mornings too, but we've got like very little time in season in the morning. So that's more for our strength work. But I try to kill two birds with one stone and get them that speed development before practice. And then that warms them up for that practice too. So that's where I get most of it done. And because they're getting so much acceleration volume in season, as with most team sports, I think max velocity is the main thing that we got to worry about retaining in season. So, we've all seen that residual training effect chart by Isher, and you're going to lose max velocity anywhere from like 2 to 8 days of not training it. And even in a sport like softball and baseball, like you've got pretty short accelerations, unless you're, in the outfield running a really long sprint. Like the likelihood that you're hitting max V in game is not always going to be, you're not always going to be certain of that, especially in softball with shorter base paths. So we got to make sure that we're hitting that outside of the game. So that's really my main priority with the speed stuff.
Yeah, and is it something where actually I guess I have two questions. So the first question is when you're talking about, you're implementing as like kind of like the end of the pre-practice warm up, you're doing things like adding in the fly or the max velocity. Are you guys doing time flies still in season? And are you doing how much like technical work are you doing? Are you still, I mean, obviously I'm sure you're still doing some sort of marches and skips and things like that, but are you doing any type of plyos prior to the actual sprints? Like what is that actually like? Can you just maybe give us like a little snapshot of like what the actual like microdose session looks like leading into a practice on like a max velo day?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would do plyos on the field, ramping them up for sprinting, but I would do some kind of A-skip variation, high knee, bleed into a buildup. I do like banded A-skips and things like that put athletes on acceleration angles that they can feel. I like build-up or crescendo runs to feel like the relaxation that we like athletes to have when they're running at top speed. And I like things like straight leg bounds and like straight leg prime times for frequency and distance. Um, like I like the frequency straight leg prime times to train like the reciprocal like agonist antagonist relationship of like contract relax. I think a lot of Cal Dietz work speaks on like how relaxation training or training athletes to relax faster is really the separator. So I've adopted some of those principles into what I do. So yeah, I mean, if we're before practice and we're just doing a build up to hit max V, I'm not going to do a ton of plyos. That stuff I think that's reserved for the weight room. I like to save time by using plyos and jumps as a warm up. Because like with a 40-minute lift session, you don't have much time to do like, contrast sets and all this stuff. Like I would rather do 5 minutes of movement prep, do your jumps. We're going to let that take up about 7 to 8 minutes of our time. And we're just going to use that to get hotter and hotter. And then we're going to do our lifting. So that's a good way that I've kind of consolidated what I want to do to save time there.
Okay. I don't know if did you say are you doing any actual timed flies like as part of the speed development, or is it just build ups into like a max velo untimed?
In the weight room, some days on like potentiation days, this is what I would recommend for some coaches. Like if you have a game day -1 session, which is how sometimes it's laid out. Like in the NCAA, I know a lot of coaches have off on Monday because they play their conference series on like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then they have off Monday. So then if they want to lift twice a week, they might be forced to do Tuesday, Thursday. That Thursday is going to be tough because you don't want to get them sore for that next day. So that's more of like a potentiation session, I feel like, for a lot of coaches. So on that day, we might do flying tens. It really depends on what the week has looked like. Maybe if you have a midweek game that night before, it might not be a great idea to do it then. Like there are weeks where I do it, there are weeks where I don't. It just depends on the overall schedule. But yes, that would be a KPI for me to track, would be flying tens. I am big on tracking that for sure.
Right. And the other question I was going to ask is, and you mentioned this earlier about trying to match it up with obviously like the sport practice. Is that something that if you're lifting on that Tuesday and Thursday or training on that Tuesday and Thursday, are you like, if Tuesday is going to be a higher volume practice day, you're going to make that also your higher volume lifting day? And Thursday is going to be a shorter, more intense practice. You're going to do the same, or vice versa. Like, are you trying to mimic them, or are you trying to kind of do the opposite? So that you're like, what's your thought process, and kind of how do you navigate that?
I always try to sync up the lifting with the practice demands for sure. Sometimes that becomes difficult. Like if, like I said, you only have 2 days to work with. Um, but yes, that is my goal. I think that makes a lot more sense in the off season, like with fall practice, because we do train more often in the fall. I think most programs are like that, so it makes a little more sense there. But yeah, I mean, overall in the in-season period, my lifting is going to be quite low volume to begin with. So I'm not really manipulating volume too much. If anything, it's going to be intensity. But by default, I mean, the best time to hit them with intensity is going to be that Tuesday coming off the off day. And the best time to prime them is going to be that game day -1. So I think those things are pretty set in stone for me.
Right. And the one thing you mentioned about sports being a lot of acceleration, not a lot of top speed. I know I've heard Tony Holler say too, um, about, I'm not sure if you're still there.
I am.
Okay. Talking about basically the idea of like every time you hit top speed, you're also accelerating. So you're getting that acceleration work, regardless of whether you're just doing it as like a 10-yard dash or something like that. You're getting acceleration work just by doing your max velo training anyways. So I think that, to me, again, that's something that we did with our teams this fall. We did when we have like a tiny little strip of turf inside that we were doing our 30-yard flies in. And like I said, we had good results. We had our football team, soccer players hitting PRs going into the last couple of weeks of the season. So that's definitely a huge aspect and huge benefit. So definitely something we're going to continue to do. One of the things that you mentioned that I thought was really cool, in the programming progressing speed training, was you talk about the vestibular training. And can you kind of maybe elaborate, just give us maybe elevator pitch on like what the benefits are, and then how you implement it, and maybe even just, and I know you mentioned it in the video, but for those that didn't watch the video, like maybe just even an example of like, I don't want to call it a game, but like the drills that you're doing to kind of work on that vestibular training to get athletes kind of amped up and ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, vestibular training has been something that I've been doing for a long time. I mean, I think it's a lot more engaging than regular warm-ups. I think it gets the brain involved at a level that reflects kind of what it's tasked with in sport. You're reacting, it's unpredictable. I think it's specific in that regard, from a speed perspective, and I think it's also going to help athletes interpret their environment and like external visual stimuli faster. So I think that's one of the things that we're after. I mean, if you looked at ACL research or injury research, like one of the things that is a predictor of those injuries is like a lack of interpretation of your environment. So that's kind of where I think the whole small-sided games philosophy came around with sports like soccer and like open field sports. I don't know if you guys have read Game Changer by Fergus Connolly, but like those drills are designed to help you interpret game speed faster. You're like you're breaking down the game into little fragments, and you're just isolating specific maybe situations. So like those things from an injury standpoint, I think are very beneficial because they reflect what's truly happening. Um, so I use them mostly in the warm up. We might play games like wall ball. We'll play things like there's a game called Touchdown Tommies where there's two lines beside me and like they'll just do a little tempo run. I'll throw it over their head and they got to catch it with one hand over their shoulder. So just like multi-directional, multifactorial, and like very unpredictable drills that I think just get athletes moving in a way that's specific to sport. There's another game I really love called two ball. You're like standing in a circle and you've got like 5 to 6 athletes in a circle that all have a ball in their hand. And then one athlete has a second ball and they're going to throw it to someone else. That person that they're getting the ball thrown to has to throw their ball to someone else before they catch the other one. And like, it's incredible how much of a sweat athletes will break into just playing a simple game like that, moving around and having to react fast and focus, which is something that like I think we miss out on with general dynamic warm-ups is like there's just a lack of focus and there's a lack of engagement. And it's a lot of times it could look like you're going through the motions. So I think it kills many birds with one stone.
Yeah, and I know there's I'm blanking on his name. I was just trying to look it up. I know there's a guy that I've heard on a lot of podcasts. He's up in like somewhere outside of Boston or somewhere in Massachusetts, I believe. He's been on like the Just Flat Performance podcast. Like, he's a high school football / high school strength coach, and he talks a lot about that and how they do their warm ups. And I know like Cal Dietz has like the infinity runs and stuff like that they do. It's definitely something that we definitely haven't implemented as much as what maybe we should be doing and what I'd like to be doing, and definitely has me thinking and kind of planning out some other things, especially as we kind of get to the back half of our semester. Um, the other thing that you had a video on that I really liked was talking about the athlete archetypes, and that's something that obviously, when I was with the Rockies, we had the Sparta force plates. So you're kind of archetyping or grouping athletes based off what their jump signatures, what they called it, what their force plate scans are telling you. But obviously, there's lots of different ways that you can go into these athlete archetypes. Even like the conscious coaching book talks about personality archetypes. And I have a follow-up question in my notes here. Eventually, we'll get to too. But what's kind of just like your elevator pitch for some things that you look at for athlete archetypes, and then how does that dictate maybe what you're going to be doing with them from a speed development standpoint, power development, weight room movements, kind of just as concise as you can make it, or as long as you want to make the answer.
I think the biggest thing that coaches need to understand is like, exercise progressions are great, but there's certain exercises that just don't work for certain people. There are athletes that I've had that I would never think about back squatting. I would never think about compressing them to a point where, they're straining for a 1 RM or stuff like that. So like one of the things I say in that video is like, you've got your force dominant athletes and you have your elastic dominant athletes. And there's a lot of different schools of thought and like classification systems that classify people differently, like wide ISA, narrow ISA, or aerial terrestrial with the motor preferences stuff. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that system, but like they're all kind of saying a similar thing, just in a different way and looking at a different indicator for these things. But if I have an athlete who's very fast at top speed, for example, okay, what are the reasons they're fast at top speed? Is it stiff ankles? Is it long levers? Is it they're very relaxed? Okay, we want to preserve those things. What are the things that might hurt those things? Okay, so if I have a very relaxed athlete who's very stiff at the ankle, maybe they have really good joint stiffness, like the last thing I want to do is make the compliance at that ankle greater by choosing exercises that might increase the amount of dorsiflexion they're going through. Like a back squat that's, you're touching your hamstrings to your calves. Like I think that would increase your joint compliance at that ankle, maybe hurt the stiffness at that ankle, and then impact speed in a negative way, because you're going to hurt that coupling time when you hit the ground. So with archetyping athletes, it's always just understanding, like, why is this athlete here? Okay, they're here because they're good for what reason? Try to isolate those reasons. This is why the FMS and I talked about the FMS in that particular video, and different movement screens are not always of value to me, because what the FMS specifically says is your lack of mobility at this joint is a bad thing. It's like, nah, I don't know if that's always true. I don't really want a mobile ankle in a sprinter. Like, for what purpose? Like, why do they need to have a mobile ankle? Other than just the arbitrary reason of like, they should have this much. Like, this is a good amount of ankle dorsiflexion. Like, by what standard? So that's one thing that I challenge, and I don't really agree with. So just to get a little deeper on that stuff, if you have like an elastic athlete that's very bouncy and they're very tendon driven, you're going to see that present itself on the force plates. And I'll give you guys just a resource at Takeoff by Daniel Bove. He's with the Pelicans. His book on force plates taught me a lot about this stuff. But you will see different lengths of time of like the braking phase, the propulsive phase, the transition phase from braking to positive. You will see these things pop up on force plates, and you'll say to yourself, okay, I understand why this athlete's so bouncy. Their time to take off is faster. Their braking RFD is faster. Their relative braking strength is faster. Okay, this force dominant athlete, okay, that makes sense. Their propulsive phase is a lot longer. They're using the ground to produce their force. They're not really utilizing free energy storage and release as much as the elastic athlete. So I don't think there's one system or one way of classifying like how an athlete operates and how they produce their force. I think you have to cross-validate across a lot of different systems, like force plates, like motor preferences, like the compression expansion model, things like that. So I think it's very multifaceted, and I think I've always said this, is watching your athletes is the best screening tool you could possibly have.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's like I said, because of just my career too, like I've been different places where they want to do very strict assessments versus places where it's like, hey, just watch them move and just train and kind of adapt to the situation, adapt to the athlete on a day-to-day basis. When you're talking about the archetypes and all the factors that go into it, do you have kind of like how many different, and maybe this isn't the right question, or there might not be an answer to this question, like on your teams, how many kind of different buckets or different groupings of athletes do you typically find? Is it just the kind of the muscle dominant and the elastic dominant, or is it, those athletes can also be subcategorized from, a certain, you know prior, like higher level classification? Like how many kind of different, like I guess if we were to walk into your weight room, how many different training programs might your athletes be on, that's kind of fitting what they need, based off all the factors that go into their archetype?
Well, I think the classifications that everyone needs to focus on are one, what's the position they play? Are they force dominant, elastic dominant? And then also like, what are their injury modifications that you need to consider? Or like, what are the things you need to do with them that make them feel healthy? So like a general rule of thumb might be with catchers, like they're getting into deep squatting all the time. Might not be the best idea to keep repping that in the gym. Isometrics might be great for them, hat field variations. So just picking things like that based on position could be really good. So like generally, like you could have maybe position players, pitchers, and catchers, and then within that you could have force dominant, elastic dominant. So I wouldn't make many buckets because like individualizing for 25 to 30, however many athletes you have, like a different program for everybody is going to be nearly impossible to coach. So you need to have some kind of standardization and structure and then change a couple things. And that's kind of how I approached it. That's how I've been doing it for a long time is I know that I can't coach one athlete at a time in a like a private session type structure. So I've got to make it easy for myself to a certain extent and just look at like, okay, what are the most impactful things on this sheet that might push the athlete the direction I want to or not. And then I'm going to change those things, whether it's the main lift, the plyometrics and the jumps, the med ball throws, and then maybe like the amount of doses that we're doing with isometrics and things like that. Those are really the big things that I think should be controlled the most. I don't think you need to individualize, like if you have one athlete doing a goblet lateral lunge, you need to have someone else doing it front foot elevated with a contralateral load. Like I think you're getting a little too granular there, and making your job very complicated at that point.
No, yeah, I think that even just simplifying it just from the standpoint of what position do they play. Like I think of our football guys, like our bigs and our skill players should probably not be doing the same plyometrics all the time, because just a regular vertical jump or regular hurdle jumps for a 300-pound offensive lineman is not the same exercise as a hurdle jump for a 170-pound super bouncy wide receiver. So it's definitely something that in a perfect world everybody would have their own program. In a ideal world, it's one of those where like we're at least grouping it via position and maybe some of the metrics that we can gather. And then at the end of the day, we also have to look at like what resources do we have? How big's our weight room? How many kids do we have in there at a time? How many coaches do we have?
Right.
Like that's another aspect. If you got 5 strength coaches, you can split up your football team into 5 different groups of 20. So it's definitely something that, all those factors have to be involved. The one thing that I had in my notes that I wanted to ask you just to see if you've heard of this, if you looked into it, if you utilize it all, because it's something that kind of came out a couple years back. It's the Christian Thibodeau like neurotyping. It was really big, probably 5-6 years ago. I know for probably a whole year I did nothing but listen to Christian Thibodeau on podcasts and things like that. And he also talked about a little bit of the vestibular training in that, but he talks about like the neurotyping in terms of like people's psychology and how that a lot of times lines up with their muscle fiber types, the type of other archetypal factors. Have you looked into that? Is that something that you've dabbled in it all, and you kind of also take that into account? Like some athletes like doing a foam roller as their warm up. Some athletes would rather do a vestibular training game. Is that something that you're factoring in as well, or is that you're just kind of basing that on the day to day?
I haven't gone into that specific education, what he does, but I've definitely had conversations with athletes about what they like their process to be, for sure. I mean, what I tend to do is, I'll give them like prehab exercises to do on their own time before the actual warm-up starts, and you'll see the differences. Like the expectation is that people are doing what they need to do to be prepared. I mean, that's always been my motto, no matter where I've been. You want athletes to be self-sufficient in some regard. Um, so yeah, I mean, people have their different ways of going about it, but we want them doing something at all times. So just if they don't know what to do, you got to educate them on maybe what they might need, or have a conversation about, hey, why aren't you doing a warm up, or why are you not approaching this with intent, or try to help them work through that, because sometimes athletes don't know what to do. I think we expect them like, come in, warm up, get ready. It's like, well, they just lie there on the foam roller because they don't really know what that looks like. They don't have our background. So I think a lot of coaches get frustrated at athletes for that when they shouldn't. It should be more education, and I'm going to help advise you with what I think you need here, and then I'm going to maybe make something specific for you to do that I know is going to impact you in a positive way, something I know that you need, and then we're gonna approach it like that. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think for me, I haven't gone through that like neurotyping like course that Thibodeau has done. It's something that's definitely on my bucket list, but I think you can accomplish the same thing with just open conversations with athletes, and not expect them to take initiative without getting the necessary education.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say about the warm up too, because it's one of those things where for most of our teams, we do a very similar warm up like all the time, like year round, just to an extent, just to keep it simple. And if for some reason like there's not a coach there to lead it, or it's not on their program, like it's almost like they just short circuit and they have no idea what to do. And it's like, you've done this warm up 8,000 times and they have just no idea. And you're right, it's like one of those where like at some point we as coaches just in general probably just need to be better about teaching them to have a little bit more ownership over their own training habits and things like that. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be setting them up for if they do go play professionally, or if they go just be an adult later in life, like they know how to warm up, they know how to squat, they know how to do all the things that we're supposed to be teaching them how to do. And I think sometimes we maybe hold their hand a little too much. And I think that's definitely something that I probably struggle with at times, because I think everything starts from the warm up. I love leading the warm ups because I feel like, from the RPR that we do to just going through our dynamic stuff, going through our speed prep and all that stuff. Like, I think, like you mentioned about speed training being the most important thing. Like, to me, like if we don't have a great warm up and we're not ready to go and we're not fired up and excited about our training session, like it's going to be hard to get people in the weight room. And, when you're on your fifth set of whatever back squat or split squat that you're on, like if you didn't have a good warm up and you didn't enjoy the training up to that point and aren't excited, like we've kind of missed 25% to 50% of what we tried to get accomplished that day. So I think as simple as it sounds, like the warm up kind of can be something that we're getting an assessment, we're getting the athletes fired up and motivated, ready to go. We're getting a chance to talk to them and kind of hear from them. And also they're getting a chance to kind of get connected with each other. Maybe they haven't seen each other all weekend, and Monday's the first time. We're all spring break now. Monday's going to be that first time that these athletes are going to get to see each other, kind of start to, build that brotherhood or sisterhood back up, amongst themselves. So, I know we got to go here in like a minute or two, but what's your kind of bit? I got two questions, but I'll keep it to just one of them, because I know this is something that's came up.
Good.
Okay, I know it's came up, and I know I don't know if I saw it from the Will Rattel that you were on, or just Will Rattel in general, just the rotational power aspect. Like, there seems like there's now become a debate of whether it's a real thing, whether it's not a thing. Like, is it plane specific? Is it exercise specific? Like, what's kind of where are you currently at in your thought process with rotational power, rotational training, et cetera?
I don't think it's its own quality. I think that power and strength, or power in general, I think is a systemic training effect. Like I think when you sprint, like I'll just give you a very exaggerated example here. Like I've seen people do like the front delt and lateral delt drop catches, like that Dan Fichter or like DB Hammer style training.
Dan
And I'm
Fichter,
like,
who I was trying to think of earlier. That's who I was trying. He's
yeah,
the guy that
so I'm
does a lot of
like,
it.
I don't know how necessary that is, and maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I'd love to know more about it, but like, I feel like if you sprint frequently enough, like you're getting that stimulus. Like sprinting is a systemic training effect, um, that's going to stimulate your entire nervous system. So like with rotational power, I think what it has to do with mostly are a combination of a couple things. I think one thing, it's comfort and strength in very end ranges of motion and separated positions. So mechanically disadvantageous positions where you're creating separation and you're trying to time the sequencing of your body. That's one thing, is strength in those ranges. The second one is the timing of those moving parts. Um, so just considering those two things, like my rotational work is not always output driven. I mean, we want to produce high outputs with it, but a lot of it is just the skill element of the timing of the different joint segments moving. So I think it's more of a skill than it is a quality. I don't think the power is plane specific. I mean, in my opinion, I'd love to test this theory. I think that someone that can squat 365 at zero point 0.6 or zero point 0.7 meters per second can rotate and swing a PVC pipe a lot faster than someone who squats 225, but they swing about all the time. Like, because that person's going to gather more ground reaction forces. I want to take a step back there. Having done like no swinging either group, I think the stronger person would swing that PVC harder. But I think like that person that squats lighter, they're more skill driven. Like they have the ability to swing. They've done it a million times. Like they might have the technical competency to swing that thing harder. The stronger athlete might be able to swing it just as hard. But yeah, I don't think it's specific to a certain plane of movement, but I do think a lot of it has to do with the skill. I mean, like I said, water bag work, med ball throw work, like all that stuff is driven towards enhancing the communication pathways and how that system kind of works together between the lower and upper half and the ground. So yeah, I mean, if you sat down on a bench and you did like a Kaiser explosive rotation, the watts you're going to produce on that are going to be significantly lower than if you used the ground and got force from the ground. So if it's not coming from your abdomen or your trunk mostly, how could you argue that it's specific to like the rotation or the transverse plane? Like if you isolate the transverse plane, you're actually going to produce a lot less. So I think it's got a lot more to do with the timing of that force moving up, for sure.
Yeah, and that reminds me too. Back whenever I was with the Rockies and we were really into the using the force plates, that was one of the questions that got brought up during like the educational portion. Is like everything we do, there's two factors that are always involved: the force of gravity and our ground reaction forces. No matter what exercise, no matter what, unless you're a swimmer, no matter what exercise you're doing, whatever movement you're doing, it starts with your interaction with gravity and your interaction with the ground, and that's why you can, to an extent, make extrapolations from here's what your vertical jump scan looks like, your force plate metrics look like, and here's how you may or may not move based off those metrics and those numbers. And you can make probably the same argument with, like you said, like an isometric thigh pull. Like the ability to be able to generate high rotational forces probably starts with your ability to just generate high forces into the ground in general anyways. So I think it comes back to the fact of we just need to get our athletes stronger anyways. And then everything else from there we can kind of clean up. And the one thing that surprises the heck out of me all the time with our baseball and softball teams is, as good as they are at swinging a bat, like if I have them do like a med ball shot put, like it's not the same movement, like it's not the same exercise.
It's not.
So it's one of those things where like I see that a lot, where I end up coaching it's almost like a whole separate skill that they have to learn. And it's one of those when I try to even tell them, like, hey, we're gonna do this med ball shot put. This is not necessarily going to make you hit more home runs. Like this is just another skill. We're just it's a ballistics exercise that we're going to do, and we want to be technical about it. But yeah, I'm still kind of in that middle ground of where, like, I think there's benefits to doing the rotational stuff and calling it rotational power, just from an athlete's mentality standpoint. Oh, like this is going to make me swing my bat harder, and maybe
That's
not.
Fine.
It's also not going to make you hit the ball either, because you still have to be able to see the ball. Like it's going to make you better at hitting the ball. But yeah, I think there's definitely truth on both ends of that spectrum. So I know you got to go, so we'll wrap it up. Do you have any last minute kind of words of advice for the young coaches, and anything that you want to add in here at the end?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest piece of advice to young coaches is just stay the course, keep fighting the good fight. I know it's really hard sometimes with getting what you want, and relationships with coaches are really hard to build. Just try to. I always tell people, just maintain professionalism, do the best job you can, control what you can control. You'll make your life a lot less stressful. I think people get really hung up on things that they can't control, and once you earn that trust and you spend a lot of time kind of biting the bullet, like, I'm not telling people to be pushovers, but I am telling people to kind of know when it's time to step in and you got to know your place. So, when I came to this school, I spent a long time just listening, and just observing. I'm never too big to not do that. So I would really implore coaches to take that same attitude, and I think they'll notice that slowly but surely their coaching experience is a little more redeeming and a lot more fulfilling and a lot more taxing on their mental well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely tough, especially, in my role with having all the teams and all the coaches that we have here, and kind of being overseeing all the training. It's definitely tough sometimes to bite your tongue, but it's one of those where like there's some arguments that just aren't worth having, at least at certain times of the year. And there's a better way to go about it. And sometimes you just need to take an exhale and figure out a better way and just listen and ask more questions. And I think that's something that we've had some of these conversations with people that are using a lot of sports science, which we didn't really get to today, but which is fine. But it's like sometimes like us as strength coaches, sport coaches, they don't even really know why they're using what they're using. So it's like sometimes it's like you can just ask, 100 questions and then start to figure out, okay, well, here's how I can actually help you. Instead of just going in with like, hey, this is my plan. This is the way that I'm going to program. This is the way that I'm going to coach. Like figure out how you can actually best adapt, because you're going to learn a lot from your athletes and from your coaches just from that aspect of it. So kind of having that confident humility in everything that you do of here's what I know, but I also have a lot to learn and be able to pick up on that from different coaches and things like that. So, well, Coach Pedulla, it was great getting to talk to you. Great getting to connect with you. Hopefully I'll be able to get this uploaded here by weekend, early next week, something like that. And I'll kind of keep you in the loop, but good luck to you guys as you go for title number 5, I believe, correct?
Thank you, sir. Yes.
Awesome. Well, good meeting you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank
too.
you.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate all you guys. Have a good one.